think of all the ways that this device has made you feel connected in this world, makes your life richer in some way that is unique to you. For me, it's a way to encourage spiritual growth here at Stanford's campus by tweeting words of inspiration or making an edit to my latest book draft. This is what enables me to do that, and at any time or any place. For you, it makes you a better businessman, giving you instant access to the information needed to close your deal, whether that's checking an email or looking up the latest market listing. This enables you to do that. For the parents in the room, it is a way to finally keep track of your teenagers. Can I get an amen? This allows you to call them until they finally decide to pick up, or, my favorite, send threatening texts when they decide to not pick up the phone. Whether they like it or not, this enables us to do so. Today, on October 30th, 2010, as we commemorate one of the greatest innovators of our century, we reflect on the man we think we know. Steve Jobs understood people. He had a deep perception for the innermost needs of man, the need for simplicity, the need for beauty, and the need for connection. When we think of this figure, we remember the gadgets he created, the MacBook, the iPad, the iPhone. But if we want to truly appreciate the things he created, we must look beyond the devices on our desks or in your pockets. Like any influential man, his lasting legacy is centered on relationships. His real accomplishment is connecting the world in an unparalleled way. He makes it possible for the 95-year-old grandma in Palm Beach, Florida, to see her newborn grandchild in Chicago, Illinois. And he makes it possible to conduct international business without leaving your office in California. He's created a system that's easy to use and accessible to all. His life's work has made our lives more meaningful, allowing us to reach greater capacities than previously known. But my purpose here today is to introduce you to a woman who knew the man behind the black turtleneck. Though these siblings did not know each other until adulthood, they quickly became the closest of friends. Mona Simpson is here to share her insight on the man she knew, not the world-renowned innovator that's helped shape today's global life. Please join me in welcoming Miss Simpson.
I grew up as an only child with a single mother. Even as a feminist, my whole life, I was waiting for a man to love who could love me. For decades, I thought that man was my father. When I was 25, I met that man. He was my brother. By then, I was living in New York. I was working on my first novel. I had a job at a small magazine in an office the size of a closet when I received a call from a lawyer. Me. The middle-class girl from California who hassled the boss to buy us health insurance. He said his client was rich, famous, and my long-lost brother. This was 1985, but I'd fallen into the plot of a Dickens novel. The lawyer refused to tell me my brother's name, so my colleagues started a betting pool. The leading candidate? John Travolta. I secretly hoped for a literary descendant of Henry James, someone more talented than I, someone brilliant without even trying. When I first met Steve, he was just a guy my age. We went for a long walk, something it happened that we both liked to do. I don't remember much of what we talked about that first day, only that he felt like someone I would pick to be a friend. He explained he worked in computers. I didn't know much about computers. I still used an old manual Olivetti typewriter. I explained that I was looking at purchasing my first computer, something called the Kremenko. He told me it was a good thing I'd waited. He said he was working on something that was going to be insanely beautiful. I want to tell you a few things I learned from Steve during 3 distinct periods over the 27 years I knew him. They're not periods of years, but of states of being. His full life, his illness, and his death. Steve worked at what he loved. He worked really hard every day. That's incredibly simple but true. He was never embarrassed about the work he did, even if it meant failure. If someone as smart as Steve wasn't ashamed to admit trying, maybe I didn't have to be. When he got kicked out of Apple, things were painful. He told me about a dinner at which 500 Silicon Valley leaders were invited to meet the president. He wasn't invited. Even though this hurt, he still went to work at Next every single day. Novelty was not Steve's highest value. Beauty was. For an innovator, he was remarkably loyal. If he loved something, a shirt, he would order 10 or 100 of them. He didn't favor trends or gimmicks. His philosophy of aesthetics reminds me of a quote that goes something like this: "Fashion is what seems beautiful now, but looks ugly later. Art can be ugly at first, but it becomes beautiful later." Steve always aspired to make beautiful later. He was willing to be misunderstood. Steve was like a girl in the amount of time he spent talking about love. Love was his supreme virtue, his god of gods. He tracked and worried about the romantic lives of each of the people he worked with. If he saw a man he thought a woman might find dashing, he'd called out, "Hey, are you single? Do you want to have dinner with my sister?" I remember the day he called when he met his wife, Laureen. He said, "There's this beautiful woman. She's really smart. She has this dog, and I'm going to marry her." When Reed was born, he began gushing, and he never stopped. He fretted over each of his children. Lisa, your boyfriends, Aaron, your travels and skirt lengths, Eve, your safety around the horses you adore, and Laureen, your abiding love sustained him. He believed that love happened all the time, everywhere. In this most important way, Steve was never ironic, never cynical, never pessimistic. I still try to learn from that. Steve was humble. Steve liked to keep learning. Once he told me if he'd grown up differently, he might have become a mathematician. In the last year of his life, he studied a book of paintings by Mark Rothko, an artist he'd just learned about, thinking about what could inspire people on the walls of a future Apple campus. Steve cultivated whimsy. What other CEO knows the history of English and Chinese tea roses and has a favorite David Austin rose? With his 4 children, with his wife, with all of us, Steve had a lot of fun. He treasured happiness. When Steve became ill, we watched his life compress into a smaller circle. Once he loved walking through Paris. He discovered a small handmade soap shop in Kyoto. He downhill skied gracefully. He cross-country skied clumsily. No more. Eventually, even ordinary pleasures no longer appealed to him. Yet, what amazed me and what I learned from his illness was how much was still left after so much had been taken away. After his liver transplant, I remember my brother learning to walk again. He got up on legs that seemed too thin to bear, arms pitched to the chair back. He'd push that chair down the Memphis hospital corridor towards the nursing station, and he'd sit, rest, go back again, each time pushing a little farther. Laureen got down on her knees, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Steve, you can do this." His eyes widened, his lips pushed together, and he tried. He always tried, and always with love at the core of that effort. He was an intensely emotional man. I realized during that time that Steve was not enduring the pain for himself. He set destinations: his son Reed's graduation from high school, his daughter Erin's trip to Kyoto, the launching of a boat he was building on which he planned to take his family around the world and which he hoped he and Laureen would someday retire on. Even ill, his taste, his discrimination, his judgment still held. He went through 67 nurses before finally finding kindred spirits, and the 3 he completely trusted to the end: Tracy, Arturo, Ellen. One time when Steve had contracted a tenacious pneumonia, his doctors forbid everything, even ice. We were in a standard ICU unit, and Steve, who generally disliked special treatment or dropping his own name, said, he finally liked special treatment. He leaned over to me and said, "I want it to be a little more special." I said, "Steve, this is already special." He wanted it to be even more special. Intubated when he couldn't talk, he asked for a notepad. He sketched devices to hold an iPad in a hospital bed. He designated new fluid monitors and x-ray equipment. He withdrew that not quite special enough hospital unit. But every time his wife walked into the room, I watched his smile remake itself on his face. For the really big things, you have to trust me, he wrote on his notepad. He looked up. You have to. By that, he meant we should disobey the doctors and give him a piece of ice. None of us knows for certain how long we'll be here. On Steve's better days, even in the last year, he embarked upon projects and elicited promises from fellow employees at Apple's to finish them. His 3 daughters remain unmarried, his 2 youngest still girls. And he wanted to walk them down the aisle as he'd walked me on the day of my wedding. We all, in the end, die in the middle of a story, of many stories. I suppose it's not quite accurate to say the death of someone who lived with cancer for many years was unexpected, but Steve's death was unexpected for us. What I learned from my brother's death was that character is essential. Who he was how he died. I remember that Tuesday he called me and asked me to come up to Palo Alto. His tone was affectionate, dear, loving, but like someone whose luggage was already strapped to the vehicle. He was already on the beginning of his journey, even as he was truly, deeply sorry to be leaving us. When I arrived, he and Lorraine were joking together like partners who lived and worked together every day of their lives. He looked into his children's eyes as if he couldn't unlock his gaze. Until about 3 in the afternoon, we could rouse him to talk to his friends from Apple. Then, after it was a while, it was clear he would no longer wake to us. His breathing changed. It became severe, deliberate, purposeful. I could feel him counting his steps again, pushing farther. This is what I learned. He was working at this too. Death didn't happen to Steve. He achieved it. He told me when he was saying goodbye and telling me he was sorry. So sorry we wouldn't be able to grow old together as we'd always planned. That he was going to a better place. He made it through the night, Lorraine next to him on the bed, sometimes jerked up when there was a longer pause than usual. She and I looked at each other, then he would heave a deep breath and begin again. This had to be done. Even now, he had a still, stern profile. The profile of an absolutist, a romantic. His breath indicated an arduous journey, some steep path altitude. He seemed to be climbing, but with that will, that work ethic, there was also sweet Steve's capacity for wonderment, the artist's belief in the ideal, the still more beautiful later. Steve's final words, hours earlier, were monosyllables repeated 3 times. Before embarking, he looked at his sister Patty, and then for a long time at his children, and then at his life's partner Lorraine, then past them. Steve's final words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow."